Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our deep dive first look at 1793 Patriots and Traitors, published by Sound of Drums and designed by Jason St. Just. This is a 1 to 5 player competitive and collaborative game of the French Revolution. Each player takes control of 1 to 5 revolutionary factions, and it's competitive because at the end of the revolution, you want it to succeed and you want to be the faction on top. But it's collaborative because if the coalition forces squash your revolution, everybody loses. This is an intriguing game of politics, law, and war. Let's jump in and take a look. So as we look at all the components spread out in front of us here, I do want to say at the start, I'm really impressed with the attention to detail, the artistic vision, and the quality of the components in this one. Just a real top-rate job by Sound of Drums putting this together. Now, before we jump in and take a look at the components, let's do a brief overview of the game. As the title would imply, 1793, this game is set in the midst of the French Revolution, with each player taking control of one of 5 different factions with their own political agendas in this game. Gameplay length is listed as 30 to 120 minutes, and that feels about right. I think there are 21 turns in the game, and one turn represents 1 month. And as you go through each turn, each player is going to take one of 4 actions. We'll talk in more detail about that later. But I feel like this is a game that's going to play fairly briskly once players get the rules down, and it's not an overly complex game. Now, units in the game are rather abstract, although there are armies and there's an area map of France off on the right-hand side, and there are leaders and generals who can play a very influential role in the game. There are 5 factions represented in the game: Cordeliers, Jacobins, Girondins, Feuillants, and then if we have 5 players, the 5th player will take the Royalists, which is an ultra-conservative faction. Now, each of these factions have their own strengths, represented by different cards they can and can't play, and so I think the game's going to play very differently depending on which faction you take. There is, however, the 21-turn scenario in the game, so there isn't a scenario variation, although there are variations for 1 to 2 players playing, and then the 5th player in the 5-player game, 1 player takes the Royalist, which isn't used if you only have 4 players playing. Let's do a quick mechanics overview as well. The game is played in 21 turns, and each turn consists of each player in turn taking one of 4 actions. Play a card. You're going to activate a revolutionary leader. You could draw a card or exchange a card. As all these actions implied, this is a card-driven game, and it's also a card management game. You can only have 6 cards in your possession, so either deployed on the map, deployed in the game, or in your hand at any one point in time. So getting the right mix of those 6 cards and using them well is going to be key to success. There are also laws in the game. A number of the cards represent laws, and players can advance those laws, at which points they are voted on, and those laws are going to give certain factions advantages and disadvantages. Each player also is vying for influence, which is represented by 30 influence cubes, and you're going to be playing cards to deploy influence in different areas and in different political alignments. Currency is also modeled in the game, and that currency allows certain players to do special actions, and then war is modeled as well. We can have coalition forces coming in, and the revolutionary forces have to deploy armies to stall them or fight them off. It's a very simple mechanic that is quickly resolved without dice. You'll notice there are no dice in this game. Other things that are here, we have coup d'etat, we have civil wars, generals, and leaders. And with that being said, let's jump in now and take a look at the rulebook. Let's take a look at our documentation. We have 2 rulebooks, a multiplayer rulebook, which is where you should start, and then the 1 to 2 player rulebook, which talks about the modifications you make to the multiplayer game to play with 1 or 2 players. Let's start with a quick look at the multiplayer rulebook. Altogether, this is 32 pages, nice clean layout. However, it's also important to note that the rules end on page 24, and then we've got an example of play in the back here with a lot of graphics and highlights on what's going on, a glossary here, and then the final back cover here is a sequence of play. I do like the rules. I've read through a number of sections of it. Very clear, easy to understand so far. Again, always with the caveat that you need to play it before you really can evaluate a rule set. One other thing I will note here is that this rulebook And the game in general, I think, does an excellent job of bringing in the history of this time. This is a subject historically that I'm not very familiar with, but I've really enjoyed kind of reading these historical snippets. And I feel like even with the hour and a half I've spent with the game so far, I've actually learned a lot about the history so far. And I'll talk more about that as we look at some of the other components too. But I love the layout, clean graphics. I like how you can call attention to important sections. And again, the rules seem very clear and straightforward for the sections that I've read so far. So overall, in terms of complexity, we're talking 24 pages of rules, and none of the concepts or the rules is really in any way feels overly complex or burdensome. There is a few elements like the coup d'etat and the Civil War that are going to create some things and some unique events. But I would say that overall I'd probably give this game a 4 out of 10 on complexity. So certainly I wouldn't let the complexity scare you away. It does seem like it's going to be a game that's going to play really smoothly once you get the rules down. Let's take a quick look now at the 1 to 2 player rulebook and just make some notes on it. So these are the modifications that you're going to be making when you play the game with 1 or 2 players. And just 2 things I want to call out. The format and everything is basically, again, the same as in the general rulebook, so good quality in that regard. The first is in the 1 to 2 player game, you can play either as the Feuillants or the Jacobin factions. You can't play as the Girondin faction in the Cordeliers. The Royalists also are not active, however, they can be influenced in this game. So a little bit different than pick one of any of the factions to play in the 1 or 2 player game. You are limited to those. And the reason why is that the non-active factions up here where it mentions it's not functioning as dummy players, but they have more as AI, functioning as challenging external events which the active players will have to deal with. And you can still influence them and get them onto your side depending on how you respond to those challenges. So a very interesting approach to the 1 or 2 player. I mean, I think based on this, I would give the game, it seems like it's got a very functional solitaire system. We'll take a look at some of the modifications to cards if you're playing with 1 or 2 players. And with that in mind, I think it's fair to say that this is a 10 out of 10 in solitaire. It looks like there's been a lot of effort to put into making this a robust solitaire experience. And as well, you're going to have the modifications here for 2 players. And again, with the intent that it does seem like this, the 3 to 4 player experience looks like it's where it's at its kind of the main focus. And then this was developed after that. So with that in mind, though, and with all the effort put into 1 or 2 players, it looks like it's going to be a solid experience no matter what the player count you've got. So let's take a look at the cards in the game. There are about 100 of them. And as we mentioned earlier on, this is very much a very card-driven game. In your turn, you can take one of 4 actions. One is to play one of these cards. The second is to activate a revolutionary leader. The third is to draw a card. And then the fourth is to exchange a card. So 3 of your 4 actions are really card-centered. And again, as we also mentioned earlier, you're only going to have a maximum of 6 either in your hand or deployed. So again, it very much seems like this is a game where you have a lot of things you want to do and you have limited means to do them, and managing your cards is going to be a very important part of playing the game well. Now you'll notice we have 3 different types of cards in general. There's one more distinction to make, but on the left hand side we can see we have leader cards distinguished by this border. Then we have action cards, which constitute a majority of the card deck, distinguished by the slightly different border. And then on the right hand side we have laws. And each one of these has different functions in the game, but when you go to play a card, you can play it in one of 3 ways. You can play it either to get to place influence cubes, determined by the number of markers that are up here, or you can convert this influence into currency to be able to use in other ways, or you can execute the action if it's an action card. So we could use these here in the middle and kind of designate these actions to take place, in which case they're going to have immediate impact on the board. And also, again, getting back at that idea that this game really pulls in the history. I love the artwork on these cards, really elegantly designed. Again, it's just so evocative of the time and period and pulls you into the history behind this game. So a really nice job with these. One other thing to mention about these cards, hidden in the leader and the action cards are also generals. So for example, here is the general card for Bonaparte. And this allows you to place that leader kind of on the board for France and starts to act as kind of defending against the coalition and other actions too. But it's also important to note that in some of these cards can only be played by particular factions. So for example, Bonaparte here can only be played by the Jacobin faction because that's the designation right here. And furthermore, this bottom row here of smaller icons is what you're using in the solo game to determine what the AI is going to do, the solo and two-player game. So this is kind of your distinguishing factors for how this card's going to be played by the automated opponent when you're playing one-player and two-player versions. So that's what that second bottom row is. On the right-hand side here, again, we have laws. So again, evocative of the period, law of the maxim, censorship, dechristianization. You're going to advance those. People vote on them and they either take effect or not take effect, in which case this text comes to play in the game. And then just a really nice job, I think, in terms of bringing in the the personalities, the actions, the laws of the time, making a very enticing blend of law, military, and history as it all just kind of pulls together into this game. Let's take a look now at our area tiles. There are 10 of these in the game, and each one of them represents a different area of influence in the French Revolution. For example, Convention Nationale is the political power. Notre Dame is here, represents religious influence. Caserne is your military influence. And these are basically punched out, and I'm going to show the board behind it. We can see the board has indentations. These are dropped into the board. Now, I'm not sure this one goes exactly here. They have their own specific places, and some of them start the game in action, and some of them are added as the game goes along. You'll also note there are holes here, so we're going to punch these out. And as you're playing, you're basically trying to get your influence cubes in these open spots to be the one that has the most influence in this particular area of the revolution. So really nice, clean design, looks really good. I really, again, like the historical artwork that's added to this, again, pulling us into the game period and the French Revolution. Let's take a quick look at the player aids. There are 4 of these. Paris board player aids, law cards player aids, leader cards player aids, and then our action card player aids. And these have basically extra text and more information than they can put on the card about those particular cards. So, and we can see these fold out. These are kind of a thinner paper, but really nice that you don't have to dive into the rule book to be able to find something like this. And again, these a number of pages here offering clarifications and extra rules on just the cards in case you have questions on how a particular card plays. And there's one here for, again, the action cards. This is the one for the leader cards. Again, these open up with more information on them. Then we have one for the law cards. And then lastly, as we just looked at, this is talking about the Paris board player aid, talking about the extra rules and any information you might need to know about particular area tiles. Another player aid, these are cotton bags that are used for your stock of influence cubes. So you have each side, each faction has 30 influence cubes at the start of the game. 13 are in your pile, and then 17 are kept in these bags as stock to be brought into the game as the game progresses. So there's one for each faction, nice design. These are, looks like they're kind of iron-inned to the bags here, so really nice clean design on these. They look great. And our last player aid are the faction cards. There's one for each of the 5 factions in the game. And it's important, it's probably a good time to note that each one of the factions has unique objectives. It has, again, certain cards it can use and certain cards it can't use. So although the game has one scenario, I feel like it's going to play very differently depending on which faction you take. So if we kind of come down in here, even looking at the, the card here for the Royalists, their objective is to crush the revolution and end the game prematurely by making sure one of the coalition armies reaches the Paris province. And then it kind of gives on further clarification. And then each one of these also, as a rules extrapolation, contains information on how to organize a coup d'etat and how to organize a civil war. And then a space down here where you're going to be keeping your pile of influence cubes before you play them. Let's take a look at our wooden tokens. So most all of the pieces in the board are wood. I've left some of them in bags and pulled out some examples so we can take a look at them. Starting over here on the right, these represent the coalition armies. So there's a bag of those, one for each nation. And then also for that, the country board of France, these leader tokens here are going to be on the board for that. The letter designates the name of the leader. Purple is royalist and blue are revolutionary leaders. We have a number of currency factors in the game. These are the gold coins, which represent standard currency. We also have 3 different types. These represent the paper currency printed by the state to try to address bankruptcy during the time. Then we have street thugs, which are a form of currency. And I believe only these are used by the Cordeliers. So again, getting at that idea that each faction is going to have particular strengths and weaknesses that it can bring to bear on the game. These are printing presses, another form of currency that can be spent to, I think this allows you to play influence from your stock rather than from your pile on your board. So each one of these functions in unique ways to kind of change actions you can take in the game. Over here we have our turn marker and a fleet marker, and then the balloon, guillotine, and this is I think the marker for Louis XVI, all of whom have they have unique functions and roles within gameplay. So there's a look at it, and we can see again our influence cubes up here. I pulled a few of them out, but there are 30 for each of the 5 factions. Getting closer to the end, we've got our maps to look at, and then the Illustrated History book add-on. Not too much to say about the map per se. It's more a playing mat than it is really a map, although this does represent Paris. We saw earlier how we're going to play those area tiles in various areas and add influence. So much of the action of the game representing the turmoil in Paris is going to be carried out on the center portion of the board. Then down the bottom here, we have again indented as well that you're going to be dropping in the turn token to represent the 21 turns as you play. The top half of the board is for your laws. So as laws are proposed, they're put on the left side. As they get voted into play, they move to the right side. And then there's another indented space here for voting yes or voting no. And again, these are all indented as well, so it's a double layer board, so those law cards won't slide all over the place. They're just going to fit nice and snug in there. Really nice. I mean, this looks, it's got kind of a symbolizing Paris, but a good quality thick cardboard map, and again with those 2 layers so that you'll be able to keep things in place as you're playing. Should probably also mention that this is 23.5 inches by 23.5 inches. And in addition to that, you're going to play off to the side the Paris board. Let's take a closer look at this. So in addition to the city board with Paris, we've got the board that represents the country of France with 15 different areas. This is where more of the military action is going to take place. So the coalition armies are going to start outside of France, and they're going to be moving in, trying to get to Paris. Your revolutionary armies, and you're trying to collaborate on this too, is to try to stop the coalition from reaching Paris, unless you're the royalists, in which case you want them to reach Paris. But this is where your leaders, your generals, your armies, and the coalition armies are going to be moving. Now, I don't think this is going to be a very complex piece. We saw that, coalition armies, if we look at this bag here, represented by these tokens. So it's going to have probably maybe 10, 15, 20 pieces on it at any one given time. So not overly complex. In combat, the resolution is based on the strength of the leader and a couple factors. So it's a very simple calculation that I think is going to take place very quickly. Combat and the military action in the game is not an overly burdensome element of gameplay, but it is one, again, of those areas that you're going to be trying to keep your eye on and take care to do well so that you don't lose the game by having Paris fall to the coalition armies. And lastly, I want to show briefly the add-on, which is a 256-page book. This is not part of the game. It is available. I'll put a link to the crowdfunding page down in the description below. You can add this on, and there are 2 ways to get it. You can get it leather-bound or in this really nice hardbound volume. Apparently this came up where the developer had said, hey, could you add a little bit of historical documentation to the game? And Jason, the designer, wrote a 256-page book about it. It's got full illustrations articulating basically everything about, from a historical perspective, the area than the game that you're going to be playing. So I love reading books that go with games, and this is just a marvelous addition. So again, I'm getting at that general feeling that if you like history and you like games, I think this is a really noble attempt to bring those 2 elements together, to be able to kind of look through and read through this book as you're playing the game about this pivotal time in French history. Just seems like it's going to be a great learning experience as well as a lot of fun to play the game. There we have it, a deep dive first look at Patriots and Traitors in all its glory. I'll put a link to, I believe it's got a day or 2 left of crowdfunding as I'm making this, but I'll try to keep the links updated if people are interested in getting more information about how to get this game. So check the description for the latest information on that. If you have enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy another game from Sound of Drums, which is Elau 1807. I'll put a link to that video if you want to take a look at that. Thanks very much for watching. Happy to entertain any questions that you might have about the game.